My name's Anant, and I run a design consultancy called Matter of Form. And we do three things. We do brand strategy, digital experience, and innovation. So that's sort of the hat that I wear, and that's the lens on the next couple of slides. I do also want to say, in antithesis to the brilliant Bain presentation, there is not a single statistic in my presentation. It's all made up. It's the truth. It's true. I just want to spend a couple of slides just assessing what traditional luxury codes are. Right? And luxury, to me, has always had this strong creative presence, right? Front and center of the brand. Whether it's Lagerfeld or whether it's someone like Adrian Zecker or Abloh, there's always been a prevailing and singular creative force in a luxury brand. Luxury's always had great products. Right? Luxury tends to be category leading, really exploring what the future of design and materiality and all of these types of things, and always with a sort of overt status symbol as well. And luxury's got this sort of slightly removed allure, right? This is a little bit standoffish at times. It's not that accessible, or certainly it wasn't in its traditional codes. And we've used this sort of luxe credibility to push out beyond our market and create mass appeal. Right? We're aspirational, drawing customers in, even if they're not our direct target audience. But by definition, luxury is also about comfort and convenience. That's sort of the core definition of it. And I just want to use that to just set a bit of context before I talk about some forces that aren't necessarily all in the luxury space, but I think will significantly reshape what we need to consider as luxury brands. Milk is the answer. The first point is around convenience, right? It doesn't matter if you're 17 or 70, you now buy your groceries online, you might buy your high-end homewares online, you might even buy your car online. Right? And the same is true of clienteling. We've just seen this really pragmatic WhatsAppification of clienteling over COVID. We had to do it, right? We've got this direct line of conversation, this direct line of dialogue with our fashion advisor or the consultant helping us buy the product we want to buy or design the travel experience that we want to design. Our brand doesn't really have much of a role in that one-to-one interaction between us and the advisor. We've basically created an economy where is on-demand everything. Right? There's this sort of Uberization of everything. Until a couple of months ago, you could pretty much go to a VC with a business plan to Uberize almost anything, and they'd probably push some crack cash across the table. If you're lucky enough to live in San Francisco, you can even Uber a manservant. But we're moving from this sort of sense of ownership to subscription, right? Like what used to once be a status signal, our ability to buy something or to invest in an experience, we can now subscribe. We have this stuff on demand, right? And that's as true of clothing as it is for the cars that we drive or the jets that we might choose to fly in. Right? That's really important in the context of luxury. We've sort of taken the hassle away from ownership. If we're lucky enough to own these things to begin with, we've also broadened our market out, right? We draw other people in who weren't perhaps traditionally a part of our market. Blanding. We've sort of homogenized our design codes. And that's as true in the recognizable brands that you see here as it is in those sort of, the sort of New York D2C Shopify-driven phenomena that we've seen, sort of Water 3.0, or the perfectly engineered hybrid of loungewear and jeans, or the luggage that's not really luggage, it's a community, but actually it's luggage. The point being, the design is very much on the inside, right? It's the story, it's the engineering, it's the people who sit behind the brand, and that's become far more important than these overt status symbols. We've become a bit more fun, right? Francois Bourgeois, as I'm sure you're all very familiar with. He's just a sort of incredibly eccentric, quite niche train spotter. And in January, he was brought into an already unexpected collaboration with Gucci and North Face to be front and center stage of how they communicated as a brand. Isn't that wonderful? Right? We're sort of celebrating the eccentric. We're bringing these people into our stage. But we're also getting more serious. Right? We're sort of slightly politicized, we're socio-politicized, we're expected to have a comment on everything. Balenciaga recently released these shoes, and as some of you might be familiar with them, is this a commentary on poverty? Is this a commentary on social mobility? Is it just a sort of creative pair of shoes? The point being, you have to be prepared to divide a room. Gaming. Gaming is going to be a huge influence on behavior and where our audiences live in the future. Gaming will grow to become the world's largest media category, ahead of TV, on-demand entertainment, film, and music. That's nuts. Right? I stopped playing games when they became 3D. I'm not tactile enough. I kept getting stuck in a glitch in a corner of a polygon. But gaming is going to be massive, and if you believe this chart, it's already bigger than all of those three categories. And with it comes this concept of a sort of earn mindset, right? When people sort of participate in an activity together, they go through a process of personal change. And if your brand is at the center of that personal change, you create a much longer lasting relationship with the individuals who partook. That's true of like SoulCycle as much as it is of a game in the metaverse. I had another point on that, but I've forgotten. We're moving from sort of physical high streets, right, to these sort of endless 2D screens, and now into 3D worlds. By show of hands, who went to Metaverse Fashion Week? Far fewer than you might expect for a room full of luxury professionals. It was a bit Second Life-y. It is not great. Well, I hope I haven't offended anyone by saying that. But what's really interesting, right, is some of the emerging technologies that are beginning to enable what happened at Metaverse Fashion Week. Right? Pope, right, a sort of, it's a way of basically sort of ledgerizing your attendance. Right? It's a new way in which you might signal that you were somewhere. It's a bit like walking into a guest bathroom and seeing all of the sort of wedding invitations on the wall. It's actually not like that at all, but you get the point. It's a sort of memento. It's a signature of your attendance. And then we have platforms like the Boson Protocol, which connect metaverse commerce with real-life commerce. Platforms are emerging like the dematerialized. Right? I'm sure most of you are familiar with the dematerialized, but what's so interesting from my perspective about the dematerialized is that really the value of most of the products sits primarily with the digital artifact. And in fact, it's the physical product that you get in addition to that digital artifact. And you can do all sorts of things. You can augment your own photo with the products you buy. Eventually, they'll be interoperable between a multitude of metaversal worlds. It really is a place where people who exist in that domain will go to sort of shop. And elsewhere, you've got organizations like Citizen M planting a flag in the metaverse and buying up real estate to create these sort of fantastical, almost Escher-esque backdrops in which people can interact and converse. I have a friend in India he's a real gamer. He's roughly my age. And this guy, he doesn't get to see his friends very often, and not that he doesn't, they're all abroad. And he takes screenshots of moments that he's bonded with his friends having a drink who live on the other side of the world in the metaverse. He's got photo albums of memorable moments in the metaverse. It's sort of quite extraordinary. People like Zaha Hadid, organizations like Zaha Hadid are designing entire worlds in the metaverse, right? So when we move from the sort of Fashion Week version of what happened in metaverse, which is quite low fidelity, we're going to have these amazing sort of fantastical realizations of amazing cityscapes and environments in which we can converse and play and work. And physically, we're taking influence from some of the things that we're creating online. We do work in Saudi Arabia for NEOM, and some of the developments that are being constructed there are absolutely mind-blowing. For example, the Line, which is a 400-kilometer blade that cuts through the desert, is a vertical living concept. So you could be living above where your kid's school is, which in itself could be above a lake, right? With a service layer entirely driven by AI that sits underground. But what's interesting is MBS, who's the creative force behind most of the projects in that region. He's an avid gamer. He's a sort of 36-year-old man who loves gaming. He takes most of his influences and creative references from the likes of Star Wars. And then just a last quick point on this dejected-looking ape, significantly more dejected-looking, no doubt, after the last 2 weeks of NFT crash. What's happened, whatever you might think about NFTs, what is particularly interesting is the fact that it's forced us to reinspect where value sits and where status can be gained. Right? And I think it's forcing us to really reconsider in this social construct in which we all strive for status, and as you get older, you think you're above status, but basically you still crave it. It's hardwired within you. It's forced us to reconsider those things, and I think it's quite refreshing and healthy to do that. I suspect people probably feel very similarly to how they felt when Walpole released a bunch of prints. And Campbell's, obviously, have released NFTs of the soup. So I just want to recap on just a couple of themes, right? So technology has sort of enabled convenience in every domain. Right? This notion of ownership and success signaling is going to start moving to subscription, and it will broaden our market opportunity as luxury brands. This notion of a brand as a logo or something that's two-dimensional, right, is turning into a set of shared beliefs. Right? The story, the context, sits behind the things that we buy and buy into. Those who carry influence are expected to have some sort of position on the world. Future audiences are going to find their status in metaversal domains. Right? Value will exist there. The market will dictate that. And we're beginning to take creative inspiration from new places. Right? We're beginning to take creative inspiration from our own visions of the future that were fictitious. But there's a problem with all of this for us as brands. Well, I'm not a brand, but all of you lot. The first is that technology has enabled convenience in every domain, but we're sort of over-optimizing the experience, so it's so convenient, there's no emotional experience, there's no emotional connection. Right? The second is, when we have to move our businesses from selling products or experiences into services that are sort of always on, there will be less brand loyalty, and we have to work constantly to basically sort of maintain our audience base. We need to build more context. We need a beginning, middle, and end to the story that we tell our customers so that they develop an emotional connection with our brands. Those who carry influence are expected to have a perspective on the world. I mean, gone are the days of the traditional brand book. We need tools that can arm the people who manage our omni-channel strategy and our marketing strategy to act autonomously on the front line, and that requires additional work. We're going to find heroes not just from music or film like we used to, but also from gaming environments. It's going to reshape what people are inspired by. And much in the way that when the Walkman was replaced by the Discman, you needed to move from sort of mechanics to optics, we're going to need an entirely new skill set to design experiences in these worlds. So this is all in the backdrop of fundamental shifts that are happening in our industry anyway. Right? We're moving from product-driven innovation to values-driven innovation. We're moving from the analog and the exclusive to a digital democracy, right? We have, sort of, in the metaverse, we'll have juxtapositions between brands that are sort of unexpected. We're moving from being predictable, right, to having to be a bit more surprising. From this sort of press release mentality of we say what we do to rich integrated campaigns that are participatory. We're moving from existing in our own world to having to explore new worlds and going to where our audience are on their terms. But most importantly, we're moving as a luxury industry from being purist and a bit cautious to having to be brave and bold. So just a couple of things to consider next with that as a backdrop. The first is brands need to consider themselves as platforms for expression, right? So what was that singular creative force needs to move into being more of a creative curator who invites the artists of tomorrow into the brand to express themselves through the brand as an operating system. The second point to consider is the fact that your brand is the sum of every single interaction, right? It's really easy in a world that's really fast-paced to forget how important every nuance is. As we move from sort of product to service to create a homogeneous experience, there needs to be a symbiosis between the two. And in order to do that, our recommendation is always to use an experience blueprint as the sort of Bible for designing new components to how your experience fits together. right? You need to think about all of the key touch points across the customer journey. You need to think about all of the on-stage and off-stage actions. And you need to think about the backstage aspects of how you deliver those services, right? Who are the people responsible for delivering against each of those touch points? How do you reorganize businesses that often exist in silos to be more customer-centric? And every message really matters, even the most nuanced messages. In an experiment that a major hotel group conducted to try and encourage people to recycle more towels, they split test 2 messages. The first message simply said, please reuse your towels for environmental reasons. The second message said, most people reuse their towels. There was a 20% difference in uplift between the 2 messages, right? Just the social proof of the second message, the nuanced way in which that sort of message was delivered encouraged the behavior that they wanted. Healthy friction, not being afraid to put content between your customer and conversion. We've sort of optimized the joy out of these experiences, and we create this phenomenon called buyer's remorse. Buyer's remorse is a sort of come down when you buy something and you haven't gone on a journey and built a connection, right? With so many options and so many demands for our customers' attention, it's so important to sort of progressively disclose your brand story, take people on a journey, and not be afraid to sort of create a bit of friction that might not be in your short-term commercial interests, but ultimately builds your brand. Customer centricity. Luxury brands traditionally are terrified of speaking to their customers and just don't like speaking to high net worth customers. It's difficult, it's awkward. Most of the time, people don't seem prepared to respond. But our customers are more flexible than ever before, right? And I just find this one anecdote from IDEO, who are a human-centered design firm. It's just being a wonderful reminder of why speaking to your customers is important. When revitalizing the customer experience for a high-end hotel or hospital organization in the States, the management were waiting eagerly for the findings of IDEO's 2-week research process. And in their heads, they already knew what the new revitalized experience should look like. And IDEO came back and played them a video of the ceiling of the hospital, which was cracked and bland and left the patients not knowing where they were in the hospital experience. And it was like fixing things where your customer's attention is in the places that really matter is so important. We do a lot of work in hospitality, and often in the boardroom, you get a very aspirational sense of where the brand wants to be and who they think their customer are. But often that's just such a minority of where the customer actually is. And when you go and speak to the cleaners or stand behind the reception, you get a true sense of where the customer is. So understanding where the customer is and how you need to move them forward into their sort of into the future state of the business is vital. Some time ago, we were putting forward a proposal for Bugatti, and we went through the archives and we found an absolutely wonderful quote, which was, when one of Bugatti's first customers' cars' brakes failed, he went and returned the car to Bugatti, complained to him. And Bugatti basically told him to do one. I make cars to go, not to stop. Talking about history and heritage, yes, it's important, but post-COVID, it matters far less. You need to revisit your founding spirit and use that as a lens to reinterpret the future. Right? It's not enough anymore to talk about history and heritage, and an emerging audience don't care as much as they used to. I just want to end with a bit of a provocation. I was going to start with this, but I think I'd have been killed for it. Does the term luxury really serve us? Or might it just be a bit asphyxiating at times, right? I believe the luxury brands of the future need to inspire action, right? By definition, we're about sort of comfort and convenience, but I just don't think that's true of most of the brands that I consider to be in the luxury space. It's a component, yes, but it's not, doesn't fit those sort of traditional codes that I associate with luxury. And I sort of think that surely what sort of binds everyone is this desire to create a sustainable business that is timeless. And I think that's particularly important when considering some of the trends and forces that will impact the things we do. Is it right to go and deliver a pixelated metaverse catwalk for Fashion Week because it's a great headline? is that the timeless thing to do? Surely that's what we strive for. I define timelessness as 4 things. It's strong founding spirit, right? So I think that's true of most brands in luxury. Long-term thinking. In this world that's gone mad for data, right, are we prepared to think long-term and make bold, creative decisions that push our businesses forwards? Right. Design. Design is the difference between apathy and action, right, and gives people joy. Let's never forget that as a luxury industry. And lastly, it's just moving from this passive state to being confident, bold, and active. Thank you very much.